What does a half-century-long relationship mean for China and the European Union? On May the 6th, 50 years ago in 1975, China established diplomatic relations with the European Economic Community, or EEC, the predecessor to the EU. Trade between the two sides has grown over 300 times in the 5 decades, from a mere $2 billion to $780 billion. Investment has also increased from almost zero to hundreds of billions of dollars. China and the EU have become each other's second largest trading partners. Given the recent unilateral actions taken by the United States, what does it mean to China and the EU to mark 50 years of relationship? What common interests do the two sides share? I'm pleased to be joined for this special discussion from London by Martin Jacques, Senior Fellow at the Institute of Modern International Relations at Tsinghua University, also a Senior Fellow at the China Institute of Fudan University. From Shanghai by Professor Meng Jing, who's Distinguished Professor and Director of the Center for European Studies at East China Normal University. She holds a Jean Monnet Chair Professor title. And from Berlin, Germany by Andreas Hube, member of the Federal Management Team at the German Federal Association for Economic Development and Foreign Trade, or BWA. He is also co-founder of the China Bridge Association, which is dedicated to bringing China and German, even European businesses closer together. The warmest welcome to all of you. So let's talk about this very important relationship. As I said, over 50 years ago, bilateral trade was minimum about $2 billion. Now it's 780 and still growing. And in terms of connectivity, the China-EU Railway Express, which nobody paid attention to at the beginning years ago when it started running, now it has run more than 100,000 cargo ships, bringing eastern China's port cities and goods and people much closer to ports and cities, towns in Europe, in Germany, for instance. Martin, let me go to you as an observer. I know you're British, but you're observing what's happening on the European continent with China. How would you assess these bilateral achievements? What factors have contributed to these accomplishments?
Well, I think put like you just have, I think it's an extraordinary transformation. And over 50, so many years. And it's whereas before we had very little to do with each other, now we have a great deal to do with each other. We've become familiar to each other in a way that we just were not previously. I think that what's, of course, been driving the process really in the first instance is China's own transformation. Because China was, back at the beginning, was a very, very weak economic presence. And over this period, it's become a very powerful presence in the world. And this has been reflected in the relationship. But of course, I mean, a lot of changing has had to be done, in particular by Europe, to adapt to that situation. And I don't think Europe's ever found it that easy to deal with China on the rise and the economic implications of that for Europe. So it's, although the relations come a long way, we can see now there are still many differences and tensions and so on that characterize the relationship. But we've got here and we've done it, and it's a great achievement.
Indeed, it's a very complex relationship. First of all, EU is not one country. It's made up of different countries of different perspectives, and China has to take all of their interests and perspectives into consideration. But Professor Meng, how would you characterize the past 50 years, especially the past 5 to 10 years, let's say, when there's been great tumultuousness in terms of how the EU is perceiving China's rise?
Well, from the European side, in the past, I would say from 2019 on, it was more clear for the EU to define China with this tripartite definition that China serves as a partner and competitor and systemic rival at the same time. And this indicates the EU's increasing ambivalence in defining its relationship with China, but towards more security-oriented dimension. And this, of course, has a very bad impact on EU-China relationship. Also, in terms of trading relationship, it's also affected because recently we have seen that the EU has introduced and adopted a number of policies and regulations trying to strengthen its own security, economic security, but somehow at the sacrifice of EU-China trade interdependence.
We'll talk about that in just a moment. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson said that China-EU relations are showing a sound momentum of development, and this year marks the 50th anniversary of diplomatic ties between China and EU, which offers important opportunities for the development of bilateral ties. And the exchange between Chinese and European legislative bodies is an integral part of China-EU relations. We hope that the two sides can work together in the same direction and enhance exchanges. And he added that members of the European Parliament are welcome to visit China. Andreas, how do you look at the saying, all of the things that China-EU relations are showing good momentum of development and that EU Parliament members are welcome to visit China? What are the signals that are being sent here?
I think these are important signals we are receiving, and especially if you see it also in the context of the unfortunately stalled discussions or ratification on the comprehensive agreement on investment. I think this is the right message. It should for sure not stop there. I think we still have to look into certain imbalances, but the CAI is a very important agreement for especially German and also especially European companies. The negotiations have been going on for 7 years, so we from our side always encourage to the ratification. So we see this as right signals at the moment, and really hope that we actually can go into build on this good basis and go further into a long-term stable engagement, because this is exactly what companies and our members also need. They need to know they don't want to be forced to react to impulse reaction like what we see in the US, but really to a stable framework where they can, with full confidence, invest.
A recent statement of the European Council President actually goes like this. She says, in response to the widespread disruption caused by the US tariffs, President von der Leyen stressed the responsibility of Europe and China as two of the world's largest markets to support a strong, reformed trading system, free, fair, and founded on a level playing field. That's according to a readout of the EU Commission. Martin, how do you read this latest statement? It seems that there has been some subtle changes in the tone of EU leaders from what they were talking about, which stressed rivalry, which stressed risks, whereas now it seems there is growing recognition of the shared responsibility and even opportunity for the two sides to work together.
I think it's worthwhile remembering that the deterioration in the relationship between the EU and China really dates from after the election of Trump as president in 2016. And I think that the key driver of the deterioration in many ways was the attitude that was coming from Washington, D.C. So we're now in a new ball game where the United States are behaving in a completely different way, which has antagonized both Europe and China. And both of them, in varying degrees, find themselves in a not dissimilar position. And I've been very interested, not just to talk about EU leaders, but public opinion and media expression during this last 100 days. Mm-hmm. And what is very interesting is that there is now a different tone by and large, expressed in regard to China. China in a way was constantly being kneeled at or even berated in the European media. And now I think that period, or for the time being at least, we'll see what happens in the future, that situation has changed. And I think what the European leaders are doing in adopting a more benign tone is a reflection of the concerns of their societies about the behavior of President Trump. Now, how far that will go, how long it will last, we don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, I think the key uncertainty in trying to measure the reaction of the EU towards the tariffs and its relationship with China concerns what happens to the tariffs which have been suspended for 90 days, affecting the EU. If Trump persists with that position, then there is a natural affinity in some degree between China and the European Union. If he doesn't, I think he will, but if he doesn't, then that's a different situation. And I think that China would find itself in a less comfortable position with regard to the EU. We'll see.
Professor Meng, this is very interesting to me that it seems that President Trump has given China and the European Union a gift by providing a window of opportunity to work together. But fundamentally, for the sake of the two parties, what is the lesson that really needs to be heeded, walking out of the past 5 years of ups and downs in this relationship? Should this relationship really be marked by charity, by favor from a third party, or really by the realization that there is common interest for the two sides to work together, even if there are differences, even if there are human rights concerns, that the two sides can find a way to work together without destroying their relationship and the hard-won good momentum of bilateral ties?
Well, we have to realize that between the EU and China, they share a great common ground in promoting multilateralism, in taking measures against the climate change, in even bilaterally strengthening continuously their trade cooperation, because both of them are integrated into this global supply chains, and they have already very strong interdependence. But currently, what's going on in the European Union is that they have paid too much attention to security, to norms and values, but which somehow divert their attention to the right concern between the EU and China. For example, the EU emphasized a lot the trade deficit in its relationship with China, but between 2023 and 2024, the EU trade in goods surplus increased from 32 billion euro to 147 billion euro. That means that the EU maintains in general a rather positive structure in its global trade. And that's why I would like to say that with this relatively strong and resilient trade relations the EU has in the overall trade relations with the world, the EU should from the strategic point of view, it should make sense to situate its China policy within the broader context of global trade dynamics, rather than allowing a single bilateral deficit to dominate its economic and geopolitical outlook. And furthermore, I would rather also point out that the EU goes more to de-risking policy these days, but the EU also has to pay attention not to let de-risking to become disguised decoupling, because that will damage both the EU and China in their business interest.
Yeah. Andrea, from the business community's perspective, of course, you're speaking on behalf of German businesses. What are their aspirations? Because I understand a lot of German businesses are very much value, even depend, rely heavily on their China operations. And it's been a win-win situation.
Absolutely. I mean, this is also what we get from especially from our members. There's a clear demand, and sometimes actually you just mentioned the term of de-risking. We have corporate leaders who actually say de-risking for them means to invest further in China. So I think basically they have still a very strong confidence in the market, and not only as a market, but also as a center for innovation. And I think this is one of the key things. Maybe we also as companies start to rethink how to see China on the one side, not seeing China only as a market or a geography. I think for any company operating global, you need to see China in a global context. This is for one. The other one is really to see how do we work in China. You see more and more companies adapting in an innovated in China for the whole world approach. I think which that very much makes sense. I think basically, as I said, the aspect of innovation is a key aspect here. We need to see in the context, also in the context of the development and the formation of our kind of improved or further relationship here. So.
Yeah, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to my guests, Martin Jacques, Menjing, and Andreas Hube. Thank you very much for sharing with us your perspectives.